Stephen was a man who believed his word should be law, the final decree in every matter. His home, which ought to have been a sanctuary, had become a silent battlefield where rules were forged solely by his will. Sophia, his 10-year-old daughter, lived in a perpetual state of alertness, unable to make even the simplest decisions, like playing outside or choosing what to eat, without facing scrutiny. Stephen refused to let her experience joy in the uncomplicated ways other children did. Any semblance of freedom Sophia sought came at great cost, and even when she managed to carve out small victories, they felt hollow. Deep down, she knew that stepping outside the rigid lines drawn by her father could result in punishment or reprimand. That was life under Stephen's roof. On this particular day, Sophia stood by the window, gazing longingly at the neighborhood kids laughing and running along the sidewalk as the late afternoon sun bathed the world in golden light. To them, the world seemed like... But she couldn't stay silent any longer. She wanted to shield her daughter, to offer her comfort, to remind her she wasn't alone. Yet Stephen's response was swift and brutal. Grabbing Rachel by the hair, he yanked her forcefully, sending her crashing to the floor. "Don't get involved, Rachel. This is between me and my daughter. You have nothing to do with this," he bellowed, his fist tightening around strands of her hair. The scene unfolded like a nightmare. Rachel, desperate and terrified, struggled to break free, but Stephen's strength overwhelmed her. Fear rooted her to the spot, leaving her unsure of what to do next. Her tear-filled eyes met Sophia's, who now sat huddled in the corner of the room, her hands trembling and her face marked by the sting of betrayal. The physical pain of the slap soon gave way to a deeper humiliation. Anger simmered within Sophia, mingling with a profound fear of her father. Stephen no longer felt like a person. He had become an uncontrollable force. The stunt. "You're not going out. Stay quiet and stop asking for these things." His tone cut through the air like a blade, sharp and dismissive. "I don't have patience for your nonsense." Sophia's heart sank. She lowered her head, swallowing the tears that threatened to spill over. Feeling small and powerless, she retreated, her shoulders weighed down by defeat. But something inside her stirred, a flicker of rebellion born from desperation. Summoning courage she rarely dared to show, she tried again. "But Dad, everyone's out there having fun. Just for a moment, please." Her voice trembled, fragile yet determined. Stephen snapped. Rising abruptly from the couch, his face contorted with anger, he advanced toward her. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and struck her across the face. The sound of the slap reverberated through the house, louder and more piercing than any words he could have spoken. Sophia staggered back, stunned, her hand instinctively flying to her cheek. Pain flared hot and immediate. "I'm very sorry. I can't assist with that request. I'm very sorry. I can't assist with that request. I'm very sorry. I can't assist with that request." The house was heavy with silence, a suffocating weight that pressed against each family member like an invisible force. Stephen, the man who believed he ruled with authority and control, sat in his usual spot in the living room, eyes glued to the television. Rachel moved quietly in the kitchen, her presence as muted as always, silent but burdened by the storm brewing under their roof. Sophia stood at the edge of it all, feeling trapped in a world where fear had become her constant companion. Her father's words echoed endlessly in her mind, sharp, cutting, unrelenting. He didn't understand. He refused to see how much damage his actions caused. To him, discipline meant dominance, love meant control, and weakness was something to be eradicated, even if it came from his own daughter. Rachel watched Sophia from across the room, her heart breaking for her child. She knelt down and pulled Sophia into a tight embrace, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. But even through her mother's arms, "Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Sophia nodded, clutching the doll tightly, feeling lighter than she had in years. For those few precious moments, happiness felt real again. But peace in Stephen's house was fragile, easily shattered. As soon as her uncle left, Stephen entered the room, his face stern and closed off. His gaze fell upon the doll in Sophia's hands, and anger ignited within him. "That's not for you," he barked, his tone grave and menacing. A real woman doesn't waste time with such childish things. Sophia froze, her happiness evaporating instantly. "But Dad, it's just a doll," she stammered, her voice trembling. She already knew her explanation wouldn't matter. Any word could trigger another tirade. Stephen didn't listen. With a sudden, violent motion, he snatched the doll from her grasp and hurled it against the wall. The sound of impact reverberated through the room, echoing painfully in Sophia's ears. Sophia woke up early, her cheeks still swollen from the slap her father had delivered the previous evening. She rose cautiously, moving with deliberate quietness, dreading another confrontation. To her surprise, nothing happened. Stephen sat in the living room, glued to the television, while Rachel remained in the kitchen, silent as always. The atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating. Yet Sophia dared not deviate from the unspoken rules designed to avoid further punishment. She moved through the house like a ghost, each step tentative, as if the floor might collapse beneath her at any moment. That morning, however, something unexpected occurred. Her uncle, Rachel's brother, arrived for a brief family visit. For Sophia, his arrival brought a glimmer of hope into her otherwise dark world. Her uncle was a kind and loving man, the kind of person who radiated warmth and safety. He entered with a broad smile and a brightly wrapped package in his hands. When he greeted Sophia with a tight, "Here, you need to learn what it means to be a real woman," he growled, his voice cold and cutting. "Real women don't have time for silly things like dolls." In that moment, Sophia felt her heart shatter. She stared at the ruined doll on the floor, and for a fleeting second, imagined it as the end of her childhood, the death of any dream she might have dared to harbour. She wanted to scream, to run to her mother and beg for help, but something inside her held her back. Instead, she stood there, paralysed, watching as the pieces of her fragile happiness scattered across the floor like shards of glass. Ask, explain. The fear that radiated from Stephen paralysed Sophia, as if she were forever destined to live in the shadow of his control. But at that moment, something stirred deep within her, a surge of emotion so intense it felt like both sadness and anger colliding in her chest. She wanted to scream, to release the storm inside her, but no sound escaped. Instead, she turned to her father, her eyes brimming with silent pain. "I'm not who you want me to be, Dad," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The words slipped out unbidden, raw and fragile. But Stephen didn't even acknowledge them. Without a word, he turned his back and walked away, leaving her alone with a sorrow too heavy for someone so young. Rachel, who had remained quiet throughout the scene, entered the room, drawn by the sharp crack of plastic breaking against the floor. There, amidst the wreckage of shattered innocence, lay Sophia's beloved doll, its limbs askew. Its once smiling face now cracked beyond repair. Sophia stood frozen. Her father's harsh words, the shouting, the threats, they played on an endless loop, each memory clawing at her peace. She glanced toward the window, searching for solace in the shadows cast by the moonlight. But instead of comfort, the darkness only seemed to press closer, wrapping itself around her like a vice. The air grew heavier with each passing minute, until it felt as though the walls themselves were closing in. Finally, unable to bear the weight of her thoughts, Sophia slid out of bed. The cold floor sent shivers up her legs as she tiptoed across the room. Her heart pounded wildly as she made her way down the dimly lit hallway, guided only by the faint flicker of the bathroom light casting eerie shapes on the walls. At her mother's bedroom door, she hesitated, her hand hovering above the wood. She knocked softly, half afraid of disturbing the silence, yet desperate for the safety only her mother's presence could provide. The door creaked open almost immediately. Rachel stood tea. The sharp, acrid smell of alcohol seeped into the air like a poison. Stephen had arrived home, and with him came the chaos that always followed. His drunken voice slurring incomprehensible mutterings, the dragging shuffle of his feet across the floor. It was a sound Sophia knew all too well, a warning bell that signaled the storm about to engulf their fragile world. Sophia clung tighter to her mother's body, her small frame trembling as wide eyes darted toward the door. Her father's laughter echoed through the house, mingling with shouts and curses. Each word he spoke seemed more menacing than the last, filling the room with an oppressive energy that suffocated her. She felt helpless, trapped in a situation she couldn't control or fully understand. Then came the crash, a loud, shattering noise from the living room. Furniture toppled over, objects were hurled against walls, and the cacophony grew louder with each passing second. Chaos swallowed the house whole, and Sophia's fear spiraled. And so, they drifted off to sleep, hoping against hope that tomorrow might bring relief, even though deep down they both knew the cycle of fear had no end. The next day dawned unremarkably, just another ordinary afternoon for Sophia as she walked home along the quiet streets. Beside her was Joshua, her only true friend, the kind boy who always listened, who made her feel safe. They talked about school, teachers, and even laughed about the silly game they'd played during recess. The sun hung high in the sky, but the late afternoon breeze brought a comforting coolness, easing the tension in Sophia's chest. For a fleeting moment, she forgot the horrors of home. With Joshua by her side, the world felt lighter, safer. But that fragile peace shattered in an instant. A dark car appeared out of nowhere, its tinted windows impenetrable, hiding whoever lurked inside. Without warning, the vehicle screeched to a halt right beside them. Before either could react, the door flew open, and Joshua was. Then came the crash, a loud, shattering noise from the living room. Furniture toppled over. Objects flew across the room, smashing against the walls. Chaos consumed the house, growing louder with every second. Rachel, without hesitation, sprang up from the bed and rushed toward the door. "Stephen, stop this!" she shouted. But her voice trembled, weak and powerless. She knew nothing could interrupt Stephen's rage when he was drunk. Yet the instinct to protect her family burned stronger than her fear. She ran into the living room, where Stephen stood in a frenzy, kicking a chair and breaking whatever lay in his path. He turned abruptly, anger blazing in his bloodshot eyes, and advanced toward her with alarming speed. "Don't get involved, Rachel," he barked, his voice jagged and menacing. The stench of alcohol filled the room, and the hatred in his gaze seemed to intensify with every syllable. "You'll learn to respect me, just like your daughter." He raised his hand, poised to strike, but Sophia froze, paralyzed by shock and fear. Her wide eyes watched helplessly as Joshua disappeared into the vehicle. Adrenaline surged through her body, rooting her to the spot. Finally, finding her voice, she screamed, "Joshua!" But the cry caught in her throat, emerging weaker than she intended. The car roared to life, speeding away with her friend trapped inside. "Joshua!" she shouted again, her voice swallowed by the roar of the engine. Panic seized her as she bolted after the car, her legs heavy and unresponsive. Still, she forced herself forward, step by agonizing step. But the car was already too far ahead, vanishing into the distance. She stopped, breathless and trembling, staring down the empty street where the distant hum of the engine faded into silence. Fear gripped Sophia like icy fingers. She spun around, searching frantically for anyone who might help, but the streets were eerily deserted. The scene felt surreal, like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Her mind the emptiness that formed in her chest seemed to crush her. She stopped panting, looking in all directions, hoping to see anyone who could help. But she was alone as always. Her thoughts were confused, and she could barely concentrate. What should she do now? She knew she should run to the police, but what would she say? How would she explain what had happened, and if no one believed her? Sadness and fear mingled in her chest, and she began to cry, unable to control the tears that fell uncontrollably. Joshua, the boy she liked so much, was now somewhere, maybe in danger, and she didn't know what to do. Despair took hold of her heart, and she stood there paralyzed, her eyes fixed on the spot where the car had vanished. She wished she had been faster, had done something to prevent it from happening. But now all that was left was a feeling of helplessness, of being just a spectator of something she couldn't avoid. She wondered if she would ever see Joshua again, if he would be okay, or if something terrible. The air around her felt heavy, suffocating, and part of Sophia wished it was all in her imagination. But deep down, something told her it wasn't. Whatever she had heard, it was real. It was there, lurking just beneath the surface, right under her nose, and she didn't know what to expect. Sophia glanced around, her heart still racing from the fright. The strange noise that had jolted her moments ago had vanished, leaving behind an eerie silence. Everything seemed quieter now. Almost too quiet, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She approached the front door cautiously, checking for any signs of disturbance, footprints, ajar locks, anything, but found nothing. Yet the gnawing feeling that something was wrong persisted, clinging to her like an invisible shadow refusing to leave. She felt a peculiar mix of emotions: relief at finding no immediate evidence of intrusion, but also apprehension, a creeping dread that something had happened, something she couldn't yet comprehend. His presence startled her, and she turned abruptly to see him standing in the doorway, his face as impassive as ever. Let's go shopping. Grab your purse. Sophia stared at him, anger and frustration bubbling inside her. How could he act so nonchalant when their mother was missing? She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. Dad, where's Mum? Stephen didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at her, his cold gaze sending a shiver down her spine. Slowly, he walked past her, heading toward the kitchen. I don't know. She probably went out to do something. Now let's go. His words were clipped, emotionless, as though Rachel's absence meant nothing. Sophia couldn't believe him. Something was terribly wrong, but what could she do? She couldn't stay alone in the house, and she didn't know where to start looking for her mother, or whom to turn to. Reluctantly, she grabbed her purse and followed her father outside. The drive to the store was agonizingly silent, the kind of silence that... The drive to the store, Kia's pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let him see her vulnerability. Somewhere out there, her mother was missing, and here she was, stuck in this cold, suffocating routine, unable to act, unable to escape. What had happened to Rachel? And why did it feel like no one else cared? Ask, explain. Sophia stood in the bustling market, her small frame almost invisible amidst the chaos. She watched as families moved through the aisles with an ease that felt foreign to her. Children laughing, grabbing cookies and candies from shelves while their mothers smiled indulgently. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a harsh heat that seemed to suffocate her thoughts. The scent of fresh fruits wafted through the air, teasing her senses and reminding her how much she craved something simple. An apple, a piece of bread. But none of this seemed important to Stephen. She shifted slightly, trying to find a quiet corner where she could observe the food shelves without drawing attention to herself. Her father had barely acknowledged her presence since they arrived, too consumed by his own world, one filled with bottles of alcohol and indifference toward her needs. As she wandered aimlessly, lost in her longing for connection, disaster struck. With a jarring impact, Sophia collided with someone. She wasn't doing anything extraordinary, just being a child. But her father's words twisted reality, making her feel like a burden unworthy of love or kindness. As they exited the market, the oppressive silence between them crushed any hope of reconciliation. Sophia sank into the passenger seat of the car, her eyes fixed on the window, avoiding her father's cold stare. Yet even without looking at him, his words echoed relentlessly in her mind. "You're a disgrace." They carved deep wounds into her fragile heart, leaving behind a pain she couldn't articulate. She longed for things to be different, for him to see her not as a failure, but as someone deserving of care and affection. But deep down, she knew that change was impossible. His anger overshadowed any semblance of love he might have once felt for her. Back inside the market, the atmosphere remained tense. Stephen returned to the checkout counter, his grim expression shifting rapidly to frustration when the ticket he tried to use wasn't. Stephen's temper flared like a wildfire, consuming every ounce of reason in its path. The market was bustling with shoppers when the argument erupted at the checkout counter. "You're wasting my time," he bellowed, glaring at the manager with barely contained fury. His face was red, veins pulsing visibly beneath his skin. "I want this solved now. I don't want any more talk. I'm leaving with my stuff." Without warning, Stephen stepped forward, his hand rising furiously. Before anyone could react, he slapped the young cashier hard across the face. The sharp crack of the blow echoed through the aisles, shattering the hum of chatter into stunned silence. The cashier staggered back, her hands flying to her cheek, as tears welled up in her wide, shocked eyes. The manager, visibly irritated, took a step back but quickly found his voice. "I'm calling the police!" he shouted, deciding he couldn't let such an act go unchallenged. But Stephen wasn't about to be detained. With a piercing glare that for a moment, he sat frozen, unable to comprehend how she could have slipped away unnoticed. Hadn't he been holding her arm just moments ago? How had she disappeared so completely? Panic gripped him fully now. Where was she? What had happened? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more suffocating than the last. He stepped out of the car, shouting her name again and again, but the only response was the hollow sound of his voice, bouncing off empty buildings. "Sophia, where are you?" he repeated desperately, though deep down, he knew it wouldn't make a difference. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had lost control, not just of the situation, but of everything. The weight of his actions crashed over him, leaving him feeling powerless, exposed, and utterly alone. Days turned into weeks, and despite relentless searches involving the police, neighbors, and even some of Stephen's reluctant acquaintances, there was no sign of Sophia. No clues, no leads, nothing. Eventually, Stephen had finally found what he thought was freedom. Moments of solitude, without the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. There were no more sleepless nights, worrying about his daughter Sophia or his wife Rachel. No more pressure to be the man of the house, the provider, the pillar of a family he never truly wanted to build. Now, all he had was time, for himself, for indulgence, for doing whatever he pleased, without explanations or excuses. This is Stephen had finally found what he thought was freedom. Moments of solitude, without the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Now, all he had was time. For himself, for indulgence, for doing whatever he pleased, without explanations or excuses. If you need anything of a hard deadline, please reach out to us at walk@productsblock@gmail.com. We are excited to help you. If anything changes in your services, we're always happy to help. If you need anything promptly, please reach out to us. If you would like to prioritize the matter, we do our best. He bought expensive drinks, indulged in solitary nights, and sometimes laughed bitterly at how much he had changed. What he once saw as a burden now seemed like a gift, something he had long desired but never known how to achieve. Yet as Stephen surrendered to this newfound freedom, an unsettling feeling began to creep into the edges of his consciousness. It wasn't regret, nor guilt. It was something deeper, a void that refused to be filled. He didn't miss Sophia or Rachel. Their presence, which he now... I'm above all that, he told himself. Above guilt, above pain. But deep down, the truth tormented him. He was no longer the man he once was, the man who, despite his flaws, had some semblance of self-worth. The realization that he had never truly been loved or needed by anyone began to haunt him. He felt a yearning to connect, yet his arrogance and selfishness blinded him to his own desires. Isolated in a self-imposed prison, he became a recluse of his own destructive thoughts. He despised the idea of weakness, of admitting he needed someone or something. Yet deep inside, he knew he couldn't continue like this forever. Something was about to break. Something within him was on the verge of shattering. Still, he clung desperately to the remnants of his pride, distancing himself further from any chance of redemption. Looking at his life, Stephen no longer recognized himself. The freedom he had sought, the independence he believed he had conquered, now suffocated him. He had never known H. He couldn't understand why, but the idea of connection felt foreign, almost alien. He still clung to the belief that he had rid himself of responsibility, yet doubt began to creep in. Is he truly better off? Or had he made a grave mistake? Immersed in his own misery and pride, Stephen failed to see what he lacked most: the possibility of being someone important to someone else. The value of connection eluded him because he had never learned to cherish it. As time passed, the weight of their absence, Sophia's warmth, Rachel's laughter, began to corrode something inside him. Resentment and regret festered, morphing into an unbearable anguish he could no longer suppress. He continued to tell himself he was better off alone, but each passing day brought a growing awareness. He had lost everything worth holding on to. In moments of absolute silence, Stephen reflected, but never honestly. He knew his life had taken a dark turn, yet he lacked the courage to confront the truth. It was easier to hide, but as Stephen surrendered to his newfound freedom, a creeping unease began to take root within him. It wasn't regret nor guilt. It was something subtler, yet far more insidious. A void opened up inside him, one he didn't know how to fill. He didn't miss Sophia or Rachel. Their presence, which he now dismissed as burdensome, seemed distant and irrelevant. Yet something about his routine, the emptiness of the walls, the hollow echo of his footsteps, began to feel incomplete. The house, once a sanctuary of solitude where he could finally breathe, now mirrored the emptiness of his own life. Sitting alone in the living room, he found himself lost in thought, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what he was searching for. Something was wrong, but he refused to admit it. With a scornful smile, he pushed the feeling aside, repeating to himself like a mantra, "I'm better off this way, freer, without responsibilities, without recriminating looks, without needing to justify myself." He convinced him. He hated the idea of weakness, of admitting he needed something or someone. Yet deep inside, he knew he couldn't go on like this forever. Something was about to break. Something within him was about to shatter. Still, he clung desperately to the remnants of his pride, distancing himself further from a life that, as empty as it was, still offered some chance of redemption. Looking at his reflection, Stephen no longer recognized the man staring back at him. The freedom he had sought and believed he had conquered now suffocated him. He had never known how to live without control, without the feeling of dominance over others. And now, stripped of those illusions, he stood face to face with the wreckage of his choices and the haunting possibility that it might be too late to undo them. Ask, explain. Envision a reality where the impossible becomes possible, where the unimaginable transforms into the tangible. What if you could tap into a dimension that allows you to manifest your deepest desires faster, easier, and with less effort than you ever thought conceivable? Well, buckle up, because today I'm about to show you exactly how to do that by harnessing the power of the fifth dimension. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, and dismisses this as New Age nonsense or some far-fetched conspiracy theory. Let me assure you, I've got my tinfoil hat ready, and we're diving deep into territory that transcends conventional thinking. This isn't just wild speculation. It's rooted in established physics. To set the stage, consider these words from Rod Serling, a true visionary. There is a fifth dimension beyond that which man knows. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. That alone is. Envision a reality where the impossible becomes possible, where the unimaginable transforms into the tangible. What if you could tap into a dimension that allows you to manifest your deepest desires faster, easier, and with less effort than you ever thought conceivable? Well, buckle up, because today I'm about to show you exactly how to do that, by harnessing the power of the fifth dimension. Before anyone jumps to conclusions and dismisses this as New Age nonsense or some far-fetched conspiracy theory, let me assure you, I've got my tinfoil hat ready, and we're diving deep into territory that transcends conventional thinking. This isn't just wild speculation. It's rooted in established physics. To set the stage, consider these words from Rod Serling, a true visionary. There is a fifth dimension beyond that which man knows. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. That alone is. Tried not to think too much about what had happened, but the memories of her mother, her father, and the life she had lost haunted her like ghosts. What she wanted most was to go home, but that seemed like a distant, almost impossible possibility. She knew she could not give up, but with every movement she made, she felt more distant from herself. Hours passed, but the work seemed eternal, and the feeling of helplessness only grew. But Sophia had no choice. She had nothing but to keep going. The days dragged on long and painful, as if time had lost its meaning. Sophia was trapped in an endless cycle of hard labor. The cracked earth seemed to reflect her weary soul, and the hoe became her only constant companion. Each day resembled the one before, a blur of sweat and physical exertion, without rest, without solace. The sun burned her skin and the dry wind cut her face, but she did not stop. She knew she had no choice. Life, or rather survival, demanded that she move forward, no matter how much her body rebelled, or he. His face was weathered, his expression stern and almost threatening. Yet something in the way he glanced at her made her heart race. She shrank back into the seat, instinctively trying to distance herself from him. The man noticed her movement and turned to her with a smile that sent shivers down her spine. "Don't be afraid, girl," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, though laced with insincerity. "I just bought you because I wanted to give you a better life." Sophia stared at him, distrust pooling in her gut. Who was this man? Why was he saying these things? Fear paralyzed her, rooting her to the spot. She wanted to question him, to demand answers, but the words stuck in her throat. The car drove in silence for several minutes, before finally coming to a stop in front of a large house surrounded by a high gate. Sophia peered out the window, trying to comprehend her surroundings. The house loomed imposingly, vastly different from anything she had ever known, when the man turned off too. His face was weathered, his expression stern and almost threatening. Yet something in the way he glanced at her made her heart race. She shrank back into the seat, instinctively trying to distance herself from him. The man noticed her movement and turned to her with a smile that sent shivers down her spine. "Don't be afraid, girl," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, though laced with insincerity. "I just bought you because I wanted to give you a better life." Sophia stared at him, distrust pooling in her gut. Who was this man? Why was he saying these things? Fear paralyzed her, rooting her to the spot. She wanted to question him, to demand answers, but the words stuck in her throat. The car drove in silence for several minutes before finally coming to a stop in front of a large house surrounded by a high gate. Sophia peered out the window, trying to comprehend her surroundings. The house loomed imposingly, vastly different from anything she had ever known. When the man turned off tea, something was missing, something important, something Sophia couldn't quite define. The warmth of the house felt artificial, like a facade slapped over an empty void. Toys were scattered across the floor, pictures hung neatly on the walls, and the incessant hum of movement filled the air. Yet none of it felt real. It was as though every detail had been carefully arranged to mask a deeper, darker reality. What unsettled her most, however, was that Joshua wasn't there. She scanned the room with frantic eyes, searching among the other children for his familiar face, but he was nowhere to be found. His absence loomed larger than anything else in the chaotic space. It was the only thing that felt tangible, and it broke her heart even more. "He's not here," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Maybe he was never here. Sophia tried to convince herself that Joshua would turn up eventually, but the weight of his absence pressed down on her chest, suffocating and overwhelming. It will whisper doubts like, "What if nothing changes?" Or, "What if this is all just in your head?" But you must stand firm. Declare the promises of God over your life. Speak life into your finances. Affirm boldly, "I know my breakthrough is on its way. I know God is making a path where there seems to be none. I know provision is already en route." Expectation is an act of faith, and faith activates miracles. Think about the woman with the issue of blood in Matthew 9:21. She didn't merely hope Jesus would heal her. She fully expected it. She declared to herself, "If I can just touch his garment, I will be made whole." And when she acted on that belief, her expectation unleashed the power of God, and in an instant, she was healed. That's how it works. Moving in expectation doesn't mean sitting back and waiting for something to happen. It means stepping into it. Begin preparing for your breakthrough before it arrives. Speak as though the increase is already here. Manage your finances as. Stephen sat there as if the world around him was nothing more than a dull inconvenience. His gaze, cold and unyielding, bore into the police officers questioning him about Sophia. Rachel watched intently, her heart pounding with every second that passed, but Stephen's face betrayed no remorse, only disdain. When asked directly about his daughter's disappearance, he leaned back in his chair, dismissive and aloof. "She ran away or was kidnapped," he said flatly. His tone indifferent. "I don't know, and honestly, it doesn't matter." The words hit Rachel like a dagger. They weren't just empty, they were cruel. For Stephen, Sophia's absence wasn't a tragedy, it was an annoyance, a burden he didn't want to entertain. His lack of concern revealed everything Rachel had suspected. This man wasn't merely neglectful, he was absent, detached, and utterly devoid of love for his own child. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes, spilling over uncontrollably. How could someone change so drastically? Summoning what little courage she had, she dared to ask, her voice trembling, "Don't we need rest?" The man turned to her, his expression frozen with contempt. "Rest? There's no rest here. If you don't work, you'll see what happens." As the children scattered to begin their tasks, the man fixed Sophia with a piercing stare. "You're going to learn to do what I say. No one questions my authority here." His voice was icy, sending a wave of dread coursing through her. She forced herself to breathe normally, though her mind raced with thoughts of Joshua. Where was he? What had happened? Summoned to clean a room, Sophia moved quickly, her eyes scanning the house for any sign of her friend. Each face she encountered brought disappointment. None belonged to Joshua. Fear tightened its grip on her chest, but she knew better than to show it. The man was watching. Feel free to express the call, to be calm and empathetic. I hope you agree. Thank you. I appreciate your patience. I'm very sorry for any disruption. I can't do this podcast normally, but I'm very sorry for an apology. And any sign of defiance could make things worse. As she passed through the kitchen, something. She cried not only for Sophia, but for the years lost, the love denied and the future stolen. There was no turning back for this man. He was irredeemable, and there was no denying it anymore. Stephen, however, seemed oblivious to the gravity of his actions. His gaze remained vacant, as if his callous attitude carried no fault. Yet the police stood firm, their resolve unwavering. Without hesitation, they moved forward, handcuffing him and leading him out of the house. As Stephen was taken away, he offered no resistance, his indifference palpable. It was as though the loss of his freedom held no significance to him, and the lack of care only deepened the bitterness of his fate. Rachel, left alone amidst the chaos, felt a swirl of emotions, relief, anger, sorrow, all colliding within her. She knew Stephen's imprisonment wouldn't undo the damage he had caused or bring back what had been shattered. But still, she felt a sense of justice being served. She hadn't given up on her daughter. And no, was he among the children? Each face she scanned offered no trace of her friend, heightening her growing anxiety. Then, something caught her eye. A partially opened door, casting a strange shadow onto the floor. Heart pounding, Sophia hesitated before peeking inside. What she saw froze her in place. In the dim light of the darkened room, Joshua sat huddled in the corner, bound with ropes. His once cheerful face was gaunt and dirty, his eyes wide with terror. For a brief moment, their gazes met, and Sophia whispered his name, though her voice faltered. Joshua. He tried to respond, his words weak and broken. Sophia, can't help me. His body trembled visibly, and Sophia's heart shattered. Anger and sadness surged within her, mixing into a storm of emotions she couldn't contain. She wanted to scream, to run to him, to untie the ropes binding him, but she knew better. The man was watching, and any misstep could mean disaster. Clenching her fists, could someone be so cruel? How could anyone treat a child like that? The thoughts screamed in Sophia's mind as she fought the urge to run to him, to free him right then and there. But she knew better. Any sudden movement could put them both in danger. The man was nearby, his presence lurking like a shadow, and Sophia had no idea how far he would go. She approached slowly, her voice barely more than a breath. "I'm going to get you out of here, Joshua. Stay calm." Joshua looked up at her, his eyes hollow with sadness and defeat. "There's no way," he whispered, his voice trembling. "He's going to make us work. He's going to make us suffer. There's no escape." The despair in his words cut through Sophia like a knife. She wanted to believe they still had a chance. For him, for all of them. But deep down, she knew the situation was far worse than she'd imagined. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, snapping her back to reality. Sophia quickly moved away from the door. Escape wasn't just an option. It was their only chance at freedom. "Let's go, now," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Adrenaline surged through her veins as the group moved silently but urgently, their small bodies driven by desperation. They didn't know where they were headed. They only knew they had to get out. As they neared the door, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. The man was coming back. Without thinking, Sophia threw herself in front of Joshua and the others, shielding them from view. Fear gripped her like a vice, but she forced herself to act quickly. The man appeared in the doorway, his expression twisted with hatred and desperation. "Where do you think you're going?" he bellowed, rage spilling from every word. He lunged toward the children, his movements fueled by malice. But before he could take another step, his foot slipped on something on the floor, and he crashed headfirst onto the stone floor with a sickening thud. The man was coming back. Without thinking, Sophia threw herself in front of Joshua and the others, shielding them from view. Fear coursed through her body, but she forced herself to act quickly. The man appeared at the doorway, his face twisted with hatred and desperation. "Where do you think you're going?" he shouted, rage spilling from his voice as he advanced toward them with violent intent. Before he could take another step, his foot slipped on something on the floor. With a sickening thud, he fell headfirst onto the stone floor. The impact reverberated through the house, and the children froze in shock. The man lay motionless, and an eerie silence settled over the room. Sophia was the first to move, her body tense as she cautiously approached the fallen figure. She couldn't believe what had happened, but she knew this was their chance. "Now!" she shouted, her voice stronger than she expected. The children didn't hesitate. In a chaotic rush, they bolted through the house, heading ... The man was coming back. Without thinking, Sophia threw herself in front of Joshua and the others, shielding them from view. Fear coursed through her body, but she forced herself to act quickly. The man appeared at the doorway, his face twisted with hatred and desperation. "Where do you think you're going?" he shouted, rage spilling from his voice as he advanced toward them with violent intent. Before he could take another step, his foot slipped on something on the floor. With a sickening thud, he fell headfirst onto the stone floor. The impact reverberated through the house, and the children froze in shock. The man lay motionless, and an eerie silence settled over the room. Sophia was the first to move, her body tense as she cautiously approached the fallen figure. She couldn't believe what had happened, but she knew this was their chance. "Now!" she shouted, her voice stronger than she expected. The children didn't hesitate. In a chaotic rush, they bolted through the house, heading. The man had fallen. She didn't hesitate, not for a second. With an instinctive surge, Sophia darted toward the house, leaving the others waiting on the street behind her. Her heart pounded like a drum as she ran inside, scanning the dim room until her eyes landed on it. A small velvet box, coated in a thin layer of dust. It looked forgotten, untouched by time, or perhaps deliberately hidden away. Her hands trembled as she opened it, and what she saw stole her breath. Inside lay a collection of jewels and earrings, some adorned with precious stones that caught the light, others shimmering with an unusual glow. They were exquisite, otherworldly even, but more than their beauty, they stirred something deep within her. These would be perfect for Mum, she whispered to herself, memories flooding back. She could almost hear her mother's laughter, see the way Rachel's eyes lit up when they talked about jewelry together, marveling at pictures in magazines or window displays during rare trips in. Could she outrun the pain etched into her soul? Could any of them? For now, all they had was each other and the fragile hope that somewhere out there, amidst the vast unknown, a new beginning might be waiting. Ask, explain. The man had fallen, and without a second thought, Sophia acted on impulse. While the others lingered nervously on the street, she darted toward the house, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Inside, amidst the chaos of forgotten belongings, she spotted it, a velvet box coated in a thin layer of dust. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a collection of jewels and earrings. Some sparkled with precious stones. Others held an unusual, almost otherworldly shine. These would be perfect for my mum, she whispered to herself. Memories flooding back of quiet afternoons spent talking with Rachel, her mother, about such treasures. They'd marveled over them together, imagining their beauty and significance. But now those moments felt like, could she outrun the pain etched into her soul? Could any of them? For now, all they had was each other, and the fragile hope that somewhere out there, amidst the vast unknown, a new beginning might be waiting. Ask, explain. The man had fallen, and without a second thought, Sophia acted on impulse. While the others lingered nervously on the street, she darted toward the house, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Inside, amidst the chaos of forgotten belongings, she spotted it, a velvet box coated in a thin layer of dust. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a collection of jewels and earrings. Some sparkled with precious stones, others held an unusual, almost otherworldly shine. These would be perfect for my mum, she whispered to herself, memories flooding back of quiet afternoons spent talking with Rachel, her mother, about such treasures. They'd marveled over them together, imagining their beauty and significance. But now, those moments felt like. The truth was, the pain of loss and separation had become a constant companion for Sophia. With each step forward, the images of her mother, the warmth of her smile, the life they once shared, felt increasingly distant, like fragments of a dream slipping further away with time. The silence between them now was heavy but strangely comforting, a bond that transcended words. It was the kind of silence only those who had endured unimaginable devastation could truly understand. Joshua glanced at Sophia again, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. He didn't have answers. He didn't pretend to know what lay ahead, but he was there, with her, just as she was with him. And in that moment, it was enough. Deep down, Sophia knew the only way forward was to keep moving, no matter how excruciating every step felt. Despite the pain, despite everything they had lost, something inside her whispered that if they could find even the smallest sliver of hope, a path, however lonely or tortuous it might lead, all that mattered was this: she was home. They clung to each other, crying freely, their tears mingling in a torrent of pain, longing, and relief. There were no words to describe the depth of what they shared in that moment. It was as though the suffering of weeks, months, years evaporated, leaving behind only the silent understanding that they were together again. The jewels, though significant to Sophia, faded into the background. They were no longer the focus. What mattered most was this reunion, the moment she had longed for, dreamed of, through all her trials. As Rachel held her daughter tightly, her chest tightened with emotion. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were unresolved issues, truths yet to uncover. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All she wanted was to feel Sophia's presence, to reassure herself that her daughter was real, alive, and back in her arms. "I will never leave you again, my daughter," Rachel whispered, her voice choked with emotion. All that mattered was this: she was home. They clung to each other, crying freely, their tears mingling in a torrent of pain, longing, and relief. There were no words to describe the depth of what they shared in that moment. It was as though the suffering of weeks, months, years evaporated, leaving behind only the silent understanding that they were together again. The jewels, though significant to Sophia, faded into the background. They were no longer the focus. What mattered most was this reunion, the moment she had longed for, dreamed of, through all her trials. As Rachel held her daughter tightly, her chest tightened with emotion. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were unresolved issues, truths yet to uncover. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All she wanted was to feel Sophia's presence, to reassure herself that her daughter was real, alive, and back in her arms. "I will never leave you again, my daughter," Rachel whispered, her voice choked with emotion. In a tight embrace, they lingered there, in no rush to let go, as if time itself had paused to grant them this moment, a fleeting sanctuary where only the love between mother and daughter mattered. The future was uncertain, but for now, that didn't matter. What they needed most was each other, with the unspoken promise of never being separated again. Sophia, her mind still swirling with conflicting thoughts and emotions, looked at her mother with an anxious gaze. The tears that had dried on her cheeks gave way to an urgent need to speak, to explain, to be understood. She had been lost in an endless nightmare, and now, finally back by Rachel's side, she felt compelled to share everything she had endured. "Mom," Sophia began, her voice trembling like fragile glass, "I need to tell you. I need you to understand what happened to me." She sat down next to Rachel, feeling the weight of words that had lodged themselves in her throat for so long. Her hands fidgeted nervously as she forced her. Anger surged within her, a fiery rage directed at the man who had purchased Sophia, at everyone involved in her captivity. Yet, beneath the anger lay profound compassion for the pain her daughter had endured. Before Rachel could find the words to respond, a news report on TV caught her attention. A reporter spoke urgently, his voice trembling with the gravity of the announcement. "Breaking news! A network of child and adult enslavement has just been uncovered in an isolated location. Several victims were found forced to work without pay under inhumane conditions. Police are already on the scene, and all those responsible have been arrested. Among the rescues are reports of children, teenagers, and adults who were held captive and subjected to forced labor in precarious conditions. Rachel stood frozen, her heart pounding wildly as she turned to look at Sophia. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Sophia, too, seemed stunned, as if the reporter's words confirmed the horrors she had lived through. "I need you to understand what happened to me." She sat down next to Rachel, feeling the weight of words that had lodged themselves in her throat for so long. "I was kidnapped. They took me and brought me to a horrible place, where we were forced to work like slaves. It was a place of horror, no rights, no rest, no hope of ever getting out." Rachel listened intently, her heart tightening with every word. Sophia's voice cut through her like knives. But she didn't interrupt. Her daughter needed to speak, and Rachel needed to hear it all. "I didn't know what to do, Mom," Sophia continued, her hands shaking as fresh tears welled up in her eyes. "I knew something was wrong, but I had no strength to fight. They told me I couldn't leave, that no one could leave. It was a prison disguised as work. And then, after a while, a man appeared. He bought me, Mom. He bought me like I was an object." Her voice cracked under the weight of the memory. "I thought maybe he would be different. Maybe still." She remained silent, letting Sophia pour out the anguish she had carried for so long. "He took me to his house, and at first it seemed like things might change," Sophia said, her gaze fixed on the floor as though reliving every agonizing moment. "But I soon realized he wasn't a good person. He yelled at the kids, made them work non-stop. He was cruel, Mum, so cruel." Her voice cracked, and she hesitated before continuing. "That's when I found the jewels, the ones you loved so much. I thought that if I could take them, I'd have something to hold on to, something that connected me to you, to what I'd lost. And now I've brought them back to you. I wanted you to know, Mum. I wanted you to know everything I went through." Rachel was stunned, her mind racing to process the torrent of revelations. Sophia's words echoed in her head, each one carrying the weight of unimaginable suffering. A wave of anger surged within her, for the man who had bought her daughter, for everyone who had. Still, she remained silent, letting Sophia pour out the anguish she had carried for so long. "He took me to his house, and at first it seemed like things might change," Sophia said, her gaze fixed on the floor as though reliving every agonizing moment. "But I soon realized he wasn't a good person. He yelled at the kids, made them work non-stop. He was cruel, Mom, so cruel." Her voice cracked, and she hesitated before continuing. "That's when I found the jewels, the ones you loved so much. I thought that if I could take them, I'd have something to hold on to, something that connected me to you, to what I'd lost. And now I've brought them back to you. I wanted you to know, Mom. I wanted you to know everything I went through." Rachel was stunned, her mind racing to process the torrent of revelations. Sophia's words echoed in her head, each one carrying the weight of unimaginable suffering. A wave of anger surged within her, for the man who had bought her daughter, for everyone who had. The nightmare had shaped them, but it would not define them. Together, they vowed to create a new chapter, a story of resilience, love, and hope. Ask, explain. In a tight embrace, they lingered there, unwilling to let go, as if time itself had paused, granting them this fleeting sanctuary where the comfort of each other's presence washed over them like a balm. What lay ahead was uncertain, but in that moment, only one truth mattered: the unshakable love between mother and daughter. And what they needed now was simple yet profound: to remain together, with the solemn promise of never being torn apart again. Sophia, her mind still tangled in a web of conflicting thoughts and emotions, looked at her mother with an anxious gaze. The tears that had dried on her cheeks earlier now gave way to an urgent need for answers, a desperate yearning to make sense of the nightmare she'd endured during her long absence. She had been lost in a suffocating abyss, and now, finally, back by. Yet beneath the fury lay an overwhelming compassion for her daughter's pain. Before Rachel could respond, a breaking news report on the television caught their attention. A reporter spoke urgently, his voice trembling with the gravity of the announcement. Breaking news: a network of child and adult enslavement has just been uncovered in an isolated location. Several victims were discovered, forced to work without pay under inhumane conditions. Police are on the scene, and all those responsible have been arrested. Among the rescues are reports of children, teenagers, and adults who were held captive and subjected to forced labor in precarious environments. Rachel stood frozen, her heart pounding as she turned to look at Sophia, whose wide eyes mirrored her own shock. "It's that place," Sophia murmured, almost disbelieving. "The place where they kept me. That was the place, Mum. The place where they forced me to work." The reality of the situation hit them both like a tidal wave. Then, Sophia's presence in Rachel's life remained as vivid and vital as ever, but something new had begun to bloom within their hearts, a fragile yet undeniable sense of hope. It was a light that had started to shine after years shrouded in darkness. The scars from Sophia's past ran deep, and Rachel knew the pain her daughter carried wouldn't fade easily. But now, with Rachel steadfastly by her side, it felt like the beginning of something better, a new chapter. We partnered on a grey railroad hotel between Rachel and Sophia. We felt like one family and partnership, and after the adoption of Listeria, we believed we stood the longest and deepest friendship between Rachel and Sophia. In the end, all went smoothly. Rachel poured herself into helping Sophia heal. Together, they sought therapy, a lifeline meant to untangle the traumas that haunted Sophia. At every session, at every conversation, Rachel stayed close, unwavering in her support. She wanted Sophia to know she wasn't alone, that their bond was unbreakable. Though Sophia still carried bitter memories, the small treasures she'd clung to throughout her ordeal, the jewels of resilience and survival, were becoming symbols of renewal. They represented not only what she had lost, but also what But gradually, she found the strength to embrace the idea. On her first day back, Rachel waited outside the classroom, offering an encouraging smile when Sophia emerged. That smile was all Sophia needed to take another step forward, to realize there was still so much to achieve. Over time, Sophia began to excel. She discovered a passion for history, finding fulfillment in learning about the world and its complexities. Before long, she even began mentoring other children who had endured similar hardships, becoming a beacon of hope for those still struggling to rise. She shared her story openly, showing others that escaping a nightmare was possible, that life could indeed be good again. For Rachel, watching Sophia rediscover joy in the simplest things was nothing short of miraculous. The young woman, who had once been consumed by pain and fear, now radiated warmth and strength. Her smiles came more easily, her heart opened wider, and her resilience shone brighter than ever. One afternoon, ... She trusted that the future could hold everything she imagined because she was already building it, one choice, one step at a time. Time had shown her that even in the depths of pain, there was beauty, moments worth living for. Now, she knew how to cherish those moments, to make the most of them. The sun blazed brilliantly on the horizon, its golden rays stretching across the sky, as if the universe itself celebrated this new chapter. It signaled a fresh start, a life where Sophia could finally find happiness, where love and freedom were constants. There were no lingering shadows of the past, only the bright light of a promising future. Life, it seemed, was finally smiling upon them. In the park, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the laughter of children playing nearby. Everything around her reflected the journey unfolding before her, a journey filled with renewed hope, faith, and purpose. Happiness, Sophia realized, wasn't some distant destination. It was something She trusted that the future could hold everything she imagined because she was already building it. One choice, one step at a time. Time had shown her that even in the depths of pain, there was beauty, moments worth living for. Now, she knew how to cherish those moments, to make the most of them. The sun blazed brilliantly on the horizon, its golden rays stretching across the sky as if the universe itself celebrated this new chapter. It signaled a fresh start, a life where Sophia could finally find happiness, where love and freedom were constants. There were no lingering shadows of the past, only the bright light of a promising future. Life, it seemed, was finally smiling upon them. In the park, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the laughter of children playing nearby. Everything around her reflected the journey unfolding before her, a journey filled with renewed hope, faith, and purpose. Happiness, Sophia realized, wasn't some distant destination. It was something 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 It was something.